Hello everyone, Tom Morley with another Godot game engine tutorial. In the last tutorial we talked about the physics and collision entities and how to set them up in the engine. We'll go a little bit further in this tutorial and we'll be adding collision notification, we'll add some movement to the UFO, and we'll also add an engine to the circle so that we can move the circle left and right. And a couple of other odds and ends. We'll add some labels so that we can see the collisions as they happen. And we might even add a particle node in there to give us a little bit of an effect on the UFO. You'll see what I'm talking about a little bit later. So we've got a lot to cover. So let's get started. Let's open up our project that we created in the last video. So go ahead and fire up your Godot engine here and pick your PCE project. We'll open it up. We have a little bit of cleanup we need to do. We need to add some static areas around the screen so that we can keep everything contained in the scene, the game area itself. We need to change the color of a couple of these boxes, and I think that's about it. And so let's get started. Let's change the color of this rigid body here to a blue color. So let's click on the sprite here, and where it says modulate, we're going to change the color for the modulate color. We'll change that to maybe a blue, darker blue, yeah, something like that. Let's see. Let's see what that looks like when we run it. A little bit too dark maybe, so let's lighten it up a little. See what that looks like. That's okay. Now we probably would have created a blue box and a yellow box and a red box when we created our graphics, but we're going to modify these rather than go back into GIMP and change the colors of the boxes. Let's select this box here, click on Sprite, and modulate that color to a red color. You just kind of get it close. We don't need it exact. Okay, so now we've got a red, a yellow, and a blue square. Okay, let's stop that. Let's rename these so that they're more appropriate. This is going to be the red square. This one will be make sure you're clicking on the rigid bodies themselves. This one will be yellow square, and last square here is going to be the blue square. Again, making sure you click on the rigid body. Oh, I guess I do have to press enter for that to take. Okay. So once you have those set up, you can minimize these PCEs, physics collision entities, because we don't need to see all of the nodes underneath. So we'll minimize the blue square, we'll minimize the red square, and we'll minimize the yellow square. Same thing with the UFO. We'll minimize that for now. Let's make sure that the UFO is highlighted, and let's move it up the tree a little bit using the arrow keys here. And we have the circle rigid body. We can minimize that as well, and the static background, kind of clean things up a little bit. So we have our static body on the ground, we have our circle, we have our UFO, a yellow, blue, and red square. So we're ready to go. We need to add a few more static areas in our game to keep the circle and the squares from bouncing off from the screen. So we're going to add 3 more static bodies. We'll start by adding a static body over here on the left. So we'll make sure our main root is selected. We'll click on Create Node. We don't need Control Node, so we'll minimize that. Go down to the Physics Body area and we'll create a static body 2D. It creates it at 0.0. And we will name this the left static body. Again, making sure I press enter. So it takes. Now with the left static body selected, let's create another node, because we need to have a collision shape, right? Otherwise it's not going to do any good if we don't have a collision shape. So let's create a collision shape 2D. Add that. We'll create a new rectangle. Now let's size that rectangle. We know where to go, right? By now. Let's make it 20. It doesn't have to be larger than that, I guess. We can make this 5 by, let's see what 200 does. Let's move that down a little bit. Kind of line it up with the edge there. Go back to the scene, and really I've made a mistake, right? Because I moved the collision shape instead of the static body. So let's reset that back to the original position of 0.0. And let's grab the left static body and move that down to where it should be. I want to keep everything together. So, okay, so we have the left. Let's minimize that, and let's create a duplicate of this. We'll do a Control D and create a duplicate. Make sure we're on the move, and we'll move this over to the right. Okay, we'll rename this to right static body. And we need to create one more for the top. So let's go ahead and duplicate it again. Do a Control D. Let's move it up to the top. Now we need to change the collision area, right? So let's expand this. Well, let's rename this first to top. Now let's expand it. So we need to change the collision shape, right? And where do we go? We go to the shape here, click on the right arrow, and we need to change this to maybe 250. Oh, now we see what happens when we duplicate the nodes sometimes. It actually duplicated the shape area. So we are affecting all the shape areas for the left, the right, and the top. So how can I change that so that I'm only affecting the top? Let's change this back to 5 first. Okay. Now let's click back on the collision shape area so that we get back to the screen right here. And where it says shape, we'll click on the down arrow again. And because it's a duplicate of the other collision areas, if I change one of them, I'm going to change them all. So I need to make this top part, this top shape, top rectangular shape, unique. So just go down and click on Make Unique. Now I've made that collision area unique to only the top. It's not going to affect the left and right anymore. So now we'll hit the right arrow and we'll click in here and we'll try 250. Yeah, that's That's exactly what we wanted to have happen. So it looks like maybe 350. Keep on going here. We'll get there eventually. 400 might do it. And we'll put 5 here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to use my arrow keys to kind of place this where it needs to be. And we're going to size it up a little bit more. Maybe 420 will do. Yeah, that's fine. If you have overlap outside the screen area, that really doesn't matter. We'll use the arrow keys to move it up a little bit. Okay. We want to make sure our areas are pretty good, so do some tweaking here. We're going to collapse this top static body, click on the left static body, and I'm going to move that over just a little bit because I want them to line up with the edge of the screen. Same thing with the right side here. Going to get that lined up with the screen. Okay, so now if I press play, I don't think we have anything that's actually hitting the areas. No, we don't. But we do notice that I'm missing something, right? I'm missing my blue box. And why is that? Because your blue box is outside the collision area. So your blue box is hitting this static collision area at the top, and it's kind of hanging out there. So we need to move that one down. So let's select that node, make sure that we've got the blue square selected. We're on the move icon here, and just move the whole thing down. And that should fix it if we play it, and it has. So far so good. Oh, I've noticed my key monitor is not running, so let's start that. Keep it up here at the top. Let's add a couple of labels. We'll need them for the UFO info and the circle info. When they collide, we'll see it on the screen. So let's add those. Let's click on main route. Click add node. The label will be in the control node, so make sure that you expand the control nodes. Go down to label and double click and add it. Let's move it underneath the T3D logo and size it up a little bit. There's my size. Let's click on it and size it to 100 by 60. Okay, let's move it under, centered a little bit better. That's close enough. And now let's duplicate this label because we'll need one for the UFO and one for the circle. We'll do Control D. And we'll move that down just using the arrow keys so that we don't slide it left or right. That looks good enough. We've got one there and then one right underneath it. That'll do. Let's rename the top label to UFO info. This label to circle info. Okay. Now let's make the cloud move from the far left to the far right. So let's modify the cloud as well. Let's click on the cloud sprite, or the animation player here, so that it pops up the animation player. And let's go to the Open Animation Editor so that we can modify some things here. And we are on frame 0 where we want to be. So let's click on the cloud sprite now that we're here and move that outside of the game area. And let's create a position key there at frame 0. So we'll create a new one, right, over the top. And let's go to 20. Move that all the way off to the right and create another position key there over the top of the old one. Okay, so now when I play it, yeah, it'll go from one side of the screen all the way to the other side of the screen. And let's make it so that it loops. We'll click on the looping animation here. So while we're playing our game, the clouds will just slowly go by from left to right. So, okay. So we've added our two labels. We've got our cloud. We've added our top, left, and right static areas. We've colored the boxes. And we might want to add a particle node to our UFO. So let's do that. Let's get that out of the way too. Let's expand our UFO Kinematic Body. Make sure that the kinematic body is selected. And let's add a particle node. We'll click on the Add New Node. I think we're done with our control node, so we can minimize that. And in the Node 2D area, let's see if we can find the Particles 2D node. There it is right there. So we'll double click on that. And you'll see that it added it to the coordinates of the Kinematic Body 2D, the UFO Kinematic Body 2D. So we want to move it down a little bit so that it's kind of shooting out the bottom. So let's move it down. We'll use the arrow keys. Now that we've got the move selected, we'll just use the arrow keys to move it down and put it right about there. Now we want the sparks to be behind the UFO, but for now we've got these white particles. White's not really going to work for us, right? Because our background's white. So let's change that first. Make sure particles is highlighted here. And let's go down to the color. You'll see phase 0 here. It's white. Let's just change that to something that's dark so that we can see it. You can change it to whatever color you want, but I'm just going to go with a shade of gray. Okay. So we want these particles to really be flowing behind the UFO. We don't want to see that little dot here. We want it behind it. So if we take the particle node and move it up higher than the sprite, you'll see that the particles will be generated behind the UFO. So let's do that. Make sure Particles 2D is selected. Let's move it up. See, as soon as you pass sprite, you see that they are actually going to be generated behind the UFO. We also want the spread to be pretty wide, so let's scroll down in the Particle 2D inspection area and look at some of the settings that we can change. We might want them to last a little bit longer, so let's change the lifetime to 5 and see what that gives us. 5 is a little much. Let's try 4. I think 4 will work. Let's change the amount to, let's say, 60. So we got 60 and 4. Now let's scroll down and look at the spread parameter. That's how much the particles are going to spread out when they start moving. So let's change that to about 130, because basically what I'm looking for is kind of to get the illusion that you're creating a tractor beam, so to speak, because that's what we're looking for. And I think we will need, I'm going to move the UFO up a little bit just so I can see what it looks like here. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Maybe we'll add some more particles. Let's click on the Particles 2D and change the amount to, let's try 100 and see what that looks like. Yeah, that'll work for our purposes. So we're good to go there. I don't want to see these particles all the time just because it'll be annoying, so make sure you got Particles 2D selected. Go down to the bottom of the inspector section and turn visible off. Just take that check mark off and you won't see them. Let's move our UFO back to where it was. Okay. And we can minimize this. We're done with the UFO body. Okay. Now I think we're finished with all the prep before we go into the code. Okay, so we need to start putting some code in here. So go ahead and click on the main root, make sure it's highlighted. Click on this button here, and that will generate a new node script. We will use the default name, that's fine. And I've supplied the file to put in here, so we won't use the default setup and code from there. So highlight all the code here and press delete and get rid of it. Download the code that I have in the comments section and paste it in here. Now that you have it pasted in, go ahead and save the scene and save all, just so that we know we've got a good starting point. So I'm going to basically uncomment the code and kind of talk about it as we go along. The very first part of it will uncomment lines 1 through 7, highlight it all, and press Control K to toggle the commenting character. And we see that, of course, it extends node 2D, and we have a couple of variables here for our HUD info, which are basically two empty strings, UFO HUD info and circle HUD info. We'll go down to the bottom here and uncomment the methods that I've created to update the labels in our scene. And so we'll highlight 90 through 96, press Control K to toggle those. And you'll see that I've created two functions. One will update the HUD info, and the other one will, or the UFO HUD info, and the other one will update the circle HUD info. They're just pass strings, and then they use the get node to get the label, and they use the set text method of the label, and of course we pass it a string, and that's how we're going to update the text in our labels. Let's highlight lines 8 through 13 and press Control K. Toggle those, and here you'll see the variables that I use to actually move the UFO around. We'll have the speed of our UFO that we can change if we want to make it go faster or slower, and we set up a couple of blank vector 2's, so our UFO motion will be 0.0 and our velocity will equal a vector of 0.0. We have our function ready. So let's grab that code and toggle that with a Control K. That's lines 22 through 24. The ready function is going to be called, and it's the place where you'll set up any initial variables for your program. You'll also want to basically turn on one of the process functions for your game. You're either going to be interacting with the physics engine or you're not. If you're interacting with the physics engine, then you need to use the fix process that's available in Godot. So you'll set the fix process to true, so that the fix process is called every physics frame. So let's take a look at that. Let's highlight line number 26. And let's go down to 41 and press Control K. Toggle that. So here's our fixed process function. It's called once, as you see here in the comment. It's called once at every physics frame, and the delta is the time between the fixed process calls. So here's where we're going to set up our calls, our code that's going to be called every physics frame. So we want to, I guess in the beginning, start with getting the UFO to move. So we're going to set up a if-else structure here, and if a left key is pressed, we'll make it go left. If the right key is pressed, we'll make it go right, up and down. It will be up and down. Now, where did I get these? This UI underscore left. What does that mean? I mean, that's not the left key, so where am I getting this information? where it says input dot is action pressed UI left. Well, that information is in, go up to your scene, press scene, and go to your project settings and go to your input map tab on that window. And there are some basic input actions that have been set up by default, and part of those default input actions would be your arrow keys up, down, left, and right. And you'll see that here. You'll see UI left, it's using the left arrow key. UI right, device 0 or button. So the UI left, the UI right, the up, and the down are all using the arrow keys on the keypad, as well as if you have a gamepad, it's also using the buttons on your keypad or your controller as well. But these are set up by default, and we can just use these. So we'll close that. So you can see here I'm changing the velocity of my X and Y coordinates of my UFO based on whether the left arrow key was pressed, the right arrow, the up or down. If no keys are pressed, of course, my velocity is going to go to 0. I don't want it to move at all, so I'll pass it a vector to 0.0. And at some point I actually have to update the information in my kinematic body, and we'll highlight 57 and 58. Let's grab 56 through 58 and press Control K. And this is where I'm actually taking the velocity. I'm going to multiply it by the delta, which again is the time between my fixed process calls to kind of smooth out the motion. So my velocity times my delta is going to be assigned to UFO motion. Then I'm going to type in get node, my kinematic body for my UFO, and then I'm going to use the move function of that kinematic body to suggest that it moves in a certain direction, and that certain direction is going to be UFO motion. So if I play this, we should be able to move the UFO around. Yep, left key, up, down. So I can move the UFO around and everything looks fine. That is up until you actually start to collide with something. So I just collided with the left side of the static boundary area, and now I'm stuck. Yeah, there, I'm unstuck. But you'll see if you play around with it a little bit, the UFO doesn't really move smoothly when it hits a boundary. It basically gets stuck. So what you need to do with the kinematic bodies is you need to implement a slide routine. Basically, this UFO wants to continue in the motion that it's traveling in the direction it's traveling in, but it can't because it hit the collision area, the collision boundaries, so it doesn't know what to do at this point. So you need to write code that basically allows it to figure out what to do. You want it to basically slide in a certain direction based on the collision area's normal, the object that you're colliding against, the normal of that collision object. You want to be able to slide around it. You don't want to get stuck. So what do? We're going to implement a slide routine, and I'm going to highlight 42 through 53, and I'm going to toggle those with a Control K. And I'm doing a couple of things here, but that's okay. I'm going to check to see if the UFO is colliding. So here's where I find out some information about what happens when my kinematic body collides with something. So I can say if my get node, I'm going to get the kinematic body 2D node dot is colliding. So if it is colliding, then I'm going to go in and execute this code here. I'm going to update the UFO HUD code, right? I'm going to create a string here and pass it to UFO HUD info and assign it to HUD UFO info. It collided with get node, my kinematic body 2D, and get collider, get name. So I'm basically going to say my UFO kinematic body hit something. So get what it hit against, and I also want its name. Not just the body, but I want the name. So it's going to assign the name along with this extra string here to this variable UFO HUD info. then I'm going to actually call my method that I created down at the bottom, right? Update UFO HUD info. It's down at the bottom right here. So I'm going to basically call that and pass this information I just created to that method. Pretty simple for that part. The slide code, if you want to know more about how this actually, or understand the mechanics behind the slide code, go to the Godot wiki page and look at the kinematic section, and it's got a nice little tutorial there and a good explanation on the slide motion here. But basically you're going to create a variable n that's going to be the collision normal. So we're going to get our UFO kinematic body of our UFO, and we're going to get the collision normal. What did it collide against? So I'm going to get that and use that to assign some motion and some velocity, and then ultimately I'm going to try and move in that direction, right? Get node my UFO kinematic body and try and suggest that it moves in that direction. That's implementing my slide routine. Okay, so now if I play it, my UFO, see how it just slid down a little bit? But it does seem like it got stuck again. Now that's not necessarily a problem with the code. It's a issue that I found when you create collision areas that use the polygon 2D. Remember, we created the ground as a polygon 2D and the UFO as a polygon 2D. So let's take a look at that, seeing as how we're here. See how we created the kinematic body 2D has a collision polygon, and that collision polygon is a custom polygon we created, as well as this ground is a custom polygon that we created. I found that when you have two objects that are colliding against each other that are collision polygons 2D, strange things happen. So we're going to fix that. We're going to change this from a collision polygon 2D to a collision shape 2D. So let's go ahead and do that. Minimize this back up. We are going to just go ahead and delete this collision polygon 2D by making sure you have it highlighted and pressing the delete key. Do I want to delete the node? Yes. So we're getting rid of the collision area for the UFO. Highlight UFO kinematic body. We're going to add nothing from the control group. It's going to be in the node 2D area, and we want collision shape 2D. Now we need to add a shape to this. We'll add a circle shape 2D, and we'll make it a little bit larger. And we'll make it 35. See if that works. Yeah, that works fine. Let's make sure we got the move highlighted, and let's move it up just a little bit. Kind of align it with the top bubble. That's fine. Alright, and go back to scene and click UFO Kinematic Body, because we're going to add another collision shape area. We're going to combine a couple of different ones. So you add another one to it. We'll change the shape of this one to a capsule shape 2D, and we'll click on this button because we need to size it up a little bit. Probably going to size it up by 20 by 65. Okay, but we see it's not, the orientation isn't correct, so let's go back to scene, click on collision shape, then collision shape for the pill, and let's rotate that 90 degrees. There we go. Now let's hit the move button and move it down so that it fits a little bit better. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to click back on the UFO Kinematic Body and minimize it. Now let's press the play button and see how that reacts. So it bounced off from that, and yeah, it looks like now I can kind of hit everything. And kind of the cool thing that you see already is that we've got the UFO collided with the left static body, right? That's the boundary that we created in the left area. Or the top static body, you just see it changed. The ground, which is the background static body, as well as the red rigid body. So anything that you hit now, you'll see it represented in our label here underneath the T3D. We see that the alignment's a little messed up, so let's fix that. Let's click on the UFO label, and let's click the select mode here so that we can change some stuff about it, and let's kind of make it a little bit wider, and let's eyeball the circle info, and let's try and get about the same distance there. It doesn't have to be perfect. We'll just work with it. So now let's move this over using the arrow keys so that it's centered under the T3D, and the same thing with this. Let's move that over so that it's kind of centered in underneath T3D there, so that they're both wide enough. Now let me play it again, and it should look a little bit better. Yeah, see how it's centered underneath the T3D now. So yeah, it looks better. Still working, hitting things, changing as it hits, circle. So yeah, UFO's all set. We can move that with our arrow keys. We're good to go with the UFO. Let's close that. Let's look at the script again. Let's go up to the top, and we'll talk about the circle, I guess. Let's highlight the variables for the circle, 16 through 19. Press Control K, and you can see the same thing, that I've created some variables for the circle for the rotation speed. So if you want it to actually rotate faster, you can increase this rotation speed up to a higher number. And we set a max and a minimum circle velocity because I'm going to basically make an engine for the circle, and we're going to be able to move the circle around by using a couple of keys as well. But I don't want it to go too fast, so that we're going to set a minimum and maximum velocity for the rotation of our circle there. So let's go down to '63 through 70 and press Control K. That's the code to move the circle. So here I'm saying if input dot is action pressed UI underscore A. Where am I getting the input from? Where did I say this might be? Let's take a look. And remember, it was under Scene, Project Settings, and under the input map. But this is UI underscore A. So I see an accept, cancel, focus, left, right, up, down, arrow keys, page up and page down, but I don't see anything that says UI underscore A, and that's because one doesn't exist. So we can create our own input actions. So let's go ahead and do that. We need to create a UI underscore A. So click on Add. Click on Cancel. You have to actually type it in here first before you add it. So we want it to be UI underscore A. We're going to add it. When you add it, you'll see it listed down at the bottom. Now, right now, this UI underscore A doesn't have any key associated with it, so we need to add a key so that when it's pressed, we can call it with the input is action press method. So go ahead and hit the plus to add a key. So we'll click the plus and we'll tell it we want to add a key to this input action. Now it's just telling us to press a key. Press the A key on the keyboard and click OK. So now you see that when you press the A key, this you can use this UIA input action now. We also need another one for UI underscore D. So let's do that as well. UI underscore D, we'll add it. It popped up down here. And click the plus to add a key to it, and press the D key and press OK. And now we have a UI underscore A and a UI underscore D. which are assigned to keys on the keyboard. Click Save, click OK, and close. Now if we run this, let's see what happens. So the circle hits the ground. We can still move the UFO, but now what happens when we hit the A key and the D key? Check that out. We can actually start driving this like a wheel, driving that circle like a wheel using the A and D keys. We can kind of move to the left or right and make the circle either stop or go left and right using the A and D keys. So that's pretty cool. And of course we've got the UFO moving around as well. So what about getting a notification when the circle, remember the circle's a rigid body, how am I going to be notified when the circle hits another collision area? So right now I'm not seeing anything in my label, right? Well, rigid bodies by default are set up so that let me click on the rigid body circle here, are set up by default to not give you notifications when they collide with other things, because there might be thousands of things that this particular circle could collide against if it was a bullet, for instance. So by default they aren't set up to give you notifications that anything collided with it. So you need to change that in the inspector over here. So make sure your circle rigid body is highlighted and come over here where it says contact monitor and make sure that there's a check mark and make sure that it says on. I've already done that. I didn't realize I forgot to uncheck it again before I started this tutorial, but make sure it's checked and make sure your contacts reported has a number of at least 1, because we want it to report at least one of the bodies that it collides with. You can set that to 2, 3, or 4, but that's going to basically create an array of 4 different bodies that it contacted. We only want it to notify us when it comes into contact with one collision area. So make sure the contact monitor is selected and that contacts reported is 1 for now. Let's go back to our script and see where I put the code for the rigid body colliding with things. And if you go to 85 through 88, we're going to basically go toggle the commenting there. And there's a function here. The function is called onCircle rigid body enter, and it's going to pass me a body. Well, did I write this or did I get this from somewhere? I basically got this function from the rigid body 2D itself. So if you click on rigid body 2D and you look at this icon up here, it says edit the node connections. So a rigid body has some nodes that you can connect to other code. So if you click this button, you'll see that it has a body enter method, that basically when it collides with something, this function will be called. Well, you can connect this to other bits of code, right? So I'm going to, I've already got it connected, but I'm going to click on the highlight body entered object body and click connect. Now what do I want to connect it to? My main root has the code, right? Has that the script. So click on the main root and you'll see that the method has a default name, which is onCircle rigid body 2D enter, and it will make the function in my main root code for me if I have this toggle turned to on. Now if I click connect, if this method wasn't here, it would create an empty method, but because it's already here, it just basically said, okay, you want to connect to the method that's already here. So in here I wrote my code to update my circle HUD. So I'm creating a string and then I'm passing that string to my method that updates the circle HUD, which is down here, right? I'm creating a string, assigning it to this variable, and then I'm calling the update circle HUD method, passing it the string that I created. which is down here, updating the label with the get node circle info.set text. Right? So now when I play it, you'll actually see the circle generate some collisions right here now. So now the circle's actually colliding with things, and my UFO is colliding with things. So now you should have everything set up so that no matter if it's your UFO or your circle that collides with something, you'll see it, your label change. So now there's one other tidbit. Remember that we did? We actually created a sprite. So why did I create the sprite? Well, let's see. So I set up the particles so that I could create a tractor beam for our UFO. So let's highlight the code 73 through 82 and toggle the comments on those lines and take a look at what's there. If we've got another input action happening here, right? Input dot is action pressed, the UI accept. Well, let's take a look. Is that defined already for us? Let's click scene, project settings, input map, and yep, UI accept is already defined for us. It's defined as the return enter space key or a button on our gamepad controller. So we can close that. It's already defined for us. So if the space is pressed, then I'm going to basically try and move my circle. I'm going to get my circle rigid body 2D, and I'm going to set its linear velocity. I want it to go in a direction. And the direction I want it to go in is I want it to go from its current location towards the UFO, right? So here I've got get node, get my UFO node, and get its global position. But I don't want the circle to go right to where my UFO is. I want it to be just underneath my UFO. So I'm adding a vector 2 of 0.80 so that the location that it's actually defining here is just underneath my UFO. And then I'm subtracting the global position of my circle rigid body 2D. So I'm basically telling it I want it to go from its current location towards the bottom of my UFO. In this line here, I found that it wasn't traveling fast enough, so this is just making the circle move 2 times faster. And of course I want to see my particles when I press the space bar, so we'll get the particle node here by using the get node and passing in the string here for UFO particles 2D, and we'll use the show method, which will actually show our particles. If the spacebar is not pressed, then I don't want to see my particles, right? So I need to be able to hide my particles. So I get my particle node and I use the hide method of the particle node. So if I play this, it should work. And it crashed. Attempt to call function hide in base null instance on a null instance. Okay, so it's complaining because it can't find my UFO particles 2D, and I know why. If we go over to the scene section and we click on the UFO Kinematic Body and we look at the particles 2D, I forgot to name the particles UFO underscore particles 2D. It's particles 2D. So come over here and rename that to UFO underscore particles 2D, and that should fix the problem. Click stop and we'll click play and move this down a little bit. So use my arrow keys. The UFO is working. It's updating my label. I can use the A and the D keys to move the circle, change the velocity of the circle, and if I press the space key, yes, my tractor beam is working. I can press the space bar at any time and it sucks the circle up to my UFO. So you've got all the makings for a game here. So use your imagination. Maybe you want to have the ball push all of the squares into the off the cliff over here, and you're going to count them as you go along. Or maybe you want to stack up all of the squares on the left hand side of the screen. I mean, basically your imagination is the limit. You can do anything at this point. You can do anything you want. The main reason for this tutorial was so that you could see the difference between the kinematic body and the rigid body, and how the notifications happen, and actually see the notifications as the game was running. So that's what we did. and it's pretty cool. And now you've got another sandbox you can play around in and have some fun and do some cool things. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope you learned something. This will probably be the last of the basic tutorials for a little bit. Next on the list is to actually start my 2D top-down shooter tutorial. So hope to see you in that video. Thanks for watching, and like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.